The president has just signed the $95 billion foreign aid funding package. Did you want him to do that? Among other disbursements in the bill, $60 billion is for Ukraine aid. The money for Ukraine has deeply divided people, mostly along party lines, but not solely. And it's not an easy topic, at least not for me. And of course, we all look at issues through our own eyes. You may remember that sometime after Putin's February 24, 2022 invasion, I went to Ukraine. In fact, I've been there twice. I've also interviewed President Volodymyr Zelensky. In my trips to Ukraine, my heart bled. Yours would have too. The sights were disturbing, to say the least. People fleeing for their lives with only the clothes they could carry. Fathers staying back to fight the Russians, though, were tearfully kissing their wives and children goodbye, maybe forever, at the train station as they put them on the overpacked trains for locations unknown. It looked like the old black and white films from World War II where you saw families fleeing the Nazis. And as the war raged on, the suffering intensified. In addition to the killings, Putin committed war crimes, using his troops to commit rape and castration as a war weapon. And then, of course, as the months passed to winter, the weather turned very cold, and Ukrainians had no fuel to cook or for heat. They were very cold. And of course, there was food scarcity, and people were very hungry. Some were even starving. As I noted, and as I covered the war there and from afar, my heart bled for those suffering. You may have noticed I wear this crafted beaded blue and yellow ring, the Ukrainian colors. A little girl in a displaced persons camp in Poland who could not speak English spotted me, put the ring that she had made on my finger. It was a very sweet gesture, and the ring helps me remember Ukraine. And by remembering, I hope it somehow makes me a better reporter for you. But as time marched on, I continued to report about borders, but not just Ukraine's, but our own border, our southern border. And to better report about our border, I went to Colombia, South America, to the staging ground for hundreds of thousands of migrants from all over the world who gathered there to begin that dangerous trek. They walked the almost 100 miles through the jungle with the dangerous Darien Gap that's filled with snakes and cartel members. Surviving the gap, they go to Mexico and then on to the United States. Our southern border is a crisis, an unhandled crisis, a humanitarian crisis, a national security crisis. We have absolutely no idea who's crossing our border and coming here. It's really just Russian roulette. And of course, now with the explosion of this crisis, all 50 states in the Union are now border states, not just Texas, Arizona, and California. We all are. And all our states have fentanyl crises that originate through that southern border. It comes to the streets of every community across the nation. No community is immune. I bet you've had deaths from fentanyl where you live, probably maybe even many. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, between 1990 and 2021, more than 243,000 have died from fentanyl here in the U.S. And of course, with more than 9 million people coming into this country since 2021, there's a huge economic cost to every community and to the federal taxpayer. So in balance, looking at our own border problems, I then came to the conclusion, as difficult as it is, that we need to take care of our own people first. We only have so much money, but it seemed to me to be the right decision. And then, well, last night, on this show, I interviewed Senator Mark Wayne Mullen of Oklahoma. He reminded me that when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, thousands and thousands of nuclear arms had been left on Ukrainian soil by the Soviets. This is a very dangerous situation for the world, including the United States. As a consequence of that danger, three nations, all nuclear powers themselves, UK, Russia, and the United States, convinced the newly independent nation of Ukraine to give up its huge arsenal of nuclear weapons, which incidentally, if Ukraine had not given up, maybe Putin would have been scared off from even invading Ukraine in 2022, or even earlier in Crimea in 2014. But the three countries, in exchange for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons, entered in an agreement with Ukraine. That's the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. In that agreement, security assurances, including by the United States, were made to Ukraine. But unlike Article 5 of the NATO Treaty, the United States, under the Budapest Memorandum, is not required to provide a specific response, but there was essentially a nod and a wink that we would, a promise. Yes, it's a fact, the words are murky and not specific, but the intent was clear. And we really wanted Ukraine to give up those nuclear weapons. It's really important to the world. So now what do? Do we keep our word from that 1994 agreement? You can tell from what I've just said, it is complicated. Maybe not for you, but for many others. And as I struggle with what I think we should do or how to divvy up limited money, I'm so disappointed with the rancor of this country over this issue. And I blame the President and members of the House and the Senate who represent us and who we pay. They do not communicate with us and bring us in on the matter that we have, so that we have comfort that difficult decisions are wisely made. They don't turn down the temperature, but instead they turn it up. They fight, they insult each other. They don't seem to listen to each other, nor consider what each other says. And they sure don't explain to us how and why they arrive at any decisions on these matters. At best, the American people get talking points on the topic from the President, the senators, and members of the House. And the talking points aren't helpful. They're just a political attempt to gain an advantage, not to help solve problems or inform the American people. Communication leads to understanding. And while we may not ultimately agree with what's decided, at least we will understand why. And their collective failure to communicate with the American people and show leadership and statesmanship by talking to each other only leads to Americans getting all revved up, taken to Twitter, and yes, just picking sides. I admire the American people. Think about it. In history, Americans have proven our goodness and strength. We're generous, moral, willing to help others in great need. World War II is a great example. We helped save the world. We can also work together in protecting our nation. The aftermath of 9/11 is a great example of us doing that. We all worked together in those very dark days. But when politicians ignore us and don't effectively explain to us and don't have a real conversation with us and explain how and why decisions are made, they do divide us. And that encourages people to just take sides when issues are simply not always just black and white. And of course, there are no perfect answers to so many problems that we face, but when our leaders basically diss us and don't fully communicate with us and treat each other like enemies, they become part of the problem, not part of the solution. And then, of course, we American people take the bait, and rather than listening to each other and trying to solve the problems together, we too fight, and worse, we tweet. So to reverse this cycle, it's time for President Biden to address the nation about Ukraine and our southern border.